presentation. And so, welcome everyone. This is really exciting to have this event. This is technically a Harvard Club of Alabama event, but really what we're trying to do as just a club is just champion so many of the great things that are in the state of Alabama. And oftentimes those things have also involvement from some of our alumni community. I was very excited to meet Bill Finch and to learn about Paint Rock. As many of you know, Alabama is one of the most biodiverse states in the country. And of course, biodiversity, along with climate change, are two of the greatest challenges facing the globe today. I think it's incredibly exciting that we in Alabama have such a richness of biodiversity, as well as leaders like Bill Finch and Beth Finch, who are trying to promote and protect the biodiversity of this state, as well as study it. Classic Alabama, we reached out through another alumni of the Harvard Club, who's on the board of Paint Rock. And, a week later, we're all in the car driving up and going and touring around Paint Rock, which is just awesome. So, with that, we wanted to hand it over to Bill to share more of that story. What is Paint Rock? What's the preserve? What is the research center that he and Beth and others are promoting? And really as a way to have you all see something that's just starting now. And it's a pretty cool place. So with that, kind of rambling intro, I'm going to hand it off to Bill and let him show you, as opposed to having me just talk it up. And of course, yes, so Patricia Haig, I was already asking questions, which is awesome. Is the preserve open to the public? I'll let Bill answer those questions. But yes, as again, reminder, please stay on mute. We'll have time for questions. Otherwise, you can put them in the Q&A in the chat, and we'll take it from there. So Bill, handing it off to you. Go ahead.
Thank you. And thanks for this opportunity to talk to you all about what we're doing. There's an illustrious Harvard alum that probably should have been invited and wasn't invited. And he might well have come had we done so, Ed Wilson. And it's very interesting because we've been working with Ed for a long time, and Ed has a great interest in Alabama. And you believe, I'm sure, that Ed's interest in Alabama is because Ed was born in Alabama and born in Birmingham, raised in Mobile. But, I think there's another way of looking at that. We always tend to underestimate Alabama. We're here. Alabama's cool. We're here because we're here. It's a nice place because it's where we live. It's a nice place because we have jobs here. But Ed doesn't have an interest in Alabama because he was born here. Ed has an interest in Alabama because Alabama made Ed what he is. I should tell you, of course, that Ed is probably the most famous evolutionary biologist in the world. He's famous for his work on biodiversity and for exploring diversity. But it's Alabama, I'm sure, that drove Ed to become what he became. He would have been great some other ways. Maybe he would have been a great and successful surgeon or attorney, but it was Alabama. Alabama's diversity is extraordinary. So I'm gonna begin now to share the screen. It's and let's go full slideshow effect here. So diversity is an interesting thing, isn't it? Does diversity really matter? And I think you can ask yourself that question over and over again. We think it does. We think it does for many reasons. Diversity is our choice for the future. Diversity is what we are, but diversity, I think, matters in ways that you probably haven't even considered yet. And diversity means more in Alabama than it means in most states. And I will tell you, I believe strongly that Alabama means more to diversity than most places in North America. And that's probably not something you've thought about. If diversity matters, it matters as much or more in Alabama than it does any place else. Let me explore that. It's partly about looking at this map, which is just a crazy map of colors, which is really about the geology of Alabama, all of the distinctive underlying sediments and geology and history that made Alabama what it is, that history stretching back 300, 400 million years and longer in some places. Just an incredibly deep history of geology and landforms. But it's also a really diverse place in terms of what it looks like. You know, you imagine California and you imagine, well, what are you going to imagine? Redwoods maybe, or other things. It's actually a diverse place. You imagine palm trees. It's hard to imagine Alabama, in part because we don't think about it very much, but also in part because it's so diverse. All of these places, the Delta, the great rivers stretching through the Delta, the areas in Northeast Alabama where these streams begin in the Tennessee Valley, the swamps, the deep forest of the deep hardwood forest, the incredible live oak forest on the edge of the Delta, the longleaf forest, what was probably the dominant forest type, the pine forest of Alabama, which, you know, you won't understand Alabama. If you think Alabama was about cotton, if you think Alabama, that's where Alabama's economy started, you missed it entirely. Alabama's economy was about forest. Alabama's economy was more than anything about the longleaf pine forest. It made Alabama's economy for many years. Wildflowers, you know, it's not just one type of wildflower habitat. It's these swamps, it's the pitcher plant bogs. If you've never seen the pitcher plant bogs of South Alabama, probably the most hyper diverse wildflower area you'll ever see. It just absolutely incredible diversity. The great ephemeral wildflower areas of North Alabama with the bluebells. And all because of this underlying geology, just to give you a sense of where we are. But here's something else weird about Alabama's diversity. It's a complex state, got lots of things going on. It represents about 1.3%, just a hair more than 1% of the landscape area of the United States. And yet, this 1% of North America has 40% of the fish species. It has 65% of the mollusk species in North America. It has, let's focus on something else. 55% of its turtle diversity, 45% of its oak species are in Alabama. 40 oak species in Alabama, 45% of the total. 50% of its elm species, 90% of its buckeye species, 90% of its hickory species, 90% of its magnolia species, 75% of its ash species, 60% of its carnivorous plant species, 65% of its marine and freshwater turtle species. Alabama is the center of turtle diversity in the Western Hemisphere. How do all these things happen in such a small state? It's an incredibly important place for diversity. And we don't think about that often enough. You know, there's another thing about Alabama that's diverse that I don't think we think about. And underneath this big live oak stretching across the waters of the Mobile-Tensaw Delta, if you look very carefully, you see these shells. And these shells are some of the oldest traces we have of cities in North America. These are the shell mounds that existed in South Alabama. There are caves in Northeast Alabama with artwork 6,000, 7,000 years old. Incredibly long history of human activity in Alabama. These are the Great Shell Mounds, the two largest cities in North America. It's worth remembering, in about 1250 AD, the two largest cities in North America were most likely in Alabama and Moundville and on Mound Island in the middle of the Tensas Delta, a hugely important place. And you have to wonder if this is the stadium. I like walking through it. It's sort of the stadium in one of these great cities on the edge of the Tensas Delta, where people watch games from about 1100 AD to about 1300 AD. It was, you know, the early version of Alabama football, I suppose. Incredible in there. There were highways, incredible highways through the Delta that were carved, that people used, that were waterways all through there. So a really fascinating, deep human history in Alabama that's just remarkable. And you got to wonder, did this human diversity, did this early human activity, did these human enterprises, what did they have to do with the diversity of this state? Let me take you to another place. These are the bluffs along the Mobile-Tensas Delta. We're moving northward as the talk goes, but let's start in the south. These are bluffs, a very prominent bluff, and it came up for sale not too long ago. It was a great marker for people who love the Delta. It was one of the ways they found their way around the Delta. Right below these bluffs is one of the deepest holes, maybe the deepest hole in Alabama, right below those bluffs. It's about 100 feet deep there, really an incredible place, but a hugely important bluff, and we wanted to purchase it. And I wanted to purchase it because not only did it have great views of the Delta, a very remarkable place, but it also had these beautiful blackwater streams that had rare hollies that, in fact, the old Alabama Dahoon holly, which has nearly been forgotten, really only known from Alabama. And I wanted to protect it. It had a very, very narrow range. But here's an interesting thing about that spot. In 1865, Lee is marching towards Appomattox. And there's a sense that, well, looks like the South is going to surrender, but it's not clear at all. Lee is equivocating about what he's surrendering. He only has a fraction of the Confederate troops. And Jefferson Davis is down in Florida and saying, oh, we ain't giving up, folks. Don't pay attention to Lee. We got lots of other potential here. I got troops all over. And so the United States knew that there was going to have to be another great battle. And that battle, the last battle of the Civil War, was the battle for the last port that hadn't been captured, the port of Mobile. And so they sent a huge group of federal troops to capture Mobile. And they began on the Baldwin County side for strategic reasons. And it culminated at a place called the Battle of Blakely. Interestingly enough, Ed Wilson's great-grandfather fought in that battle for the Confederates. But on the opposite side, on that battle, was a huge Union force and the largest contingent of black colored troops, the U.S. black colored troops, the U.S. colored troops that had ever been assembled for the war. And they were anxious to fight. Many of the soldiers who were fighting for the U.S. colored troops with the U.S. colored troops for the Union had formerly been slaves, and they were fighting literally the slaveholders who had owned them. It was a pretty, you can imagine, it's a pretty emotional battle. They led the charge, not necessarily because the white leaders wanted them to, but because they were so anxious, and they kind of jumped the gun a little bit. But within 25 minutes, U.S. colored troops had completely overrun all the Confederate defenses. The Confederate defenses collapsed. And the U.S. colored troops, this huge contingent of soldiers, pretty much won the war, ended the battle, ended the war. An amazing story right there on the bluffs of Blakely. I'll tell you about Alabama and what we don't appreciate about diversity in Alabama. We preserved every part of the Battle of Blakely, except for the part of the battle where the US colored troops overran the Confederacy. And we realized that this great bluff that we were purchasing was an incredible piece of Alabama history, not only because of its plant diversity and its fish diversity and its frog diversity and snake diversity and amphibian diversity, but also because of this incredible human story that we forget. So diversity in Alabama, it's really about understanding the intersection of human diversity and biological diversity and understanding how those two work together over and over in Alabama. These are the battlements, by the way, at Blakely that we have purchased and are now preserving. I can tell that story at another talk, but the battlements are still there. I can just imagine the US colored troops running over these Confederate battlements. Talk about statues. Why don't we have statues of the US colored troops overrunning the Confederacy in Alabama? It's because we don't honor and understand that diversity the way we need to. Diversity of all types. Moving up the river from the Delta in the southwestern part of Alabama, we discover all kinds of things. The longleaf pine forest, probably the greatest concentration of diversity of any forest type in North America. And not in the trees so much. The trees are mostly dominated by longleaf pine. But look at that beautiful understory, all kinds of grasses, all kinds of wildflowers. The Kansas prairies, they have nothing. They have nothing compared to the grass diversity in the longleaf pine forest of South Alabama. And you see all that beautiful light penetrating. We can talk about the wildflowers and that diversity in another talk. But here's another weird thing you might not appreciate. This is a density gradient of native tree species per 10,000 square kilometers. Never mind that, but look at where the deep dark blue is. It's not in North Carolina. It's not in California. It's not in Texas. It's not in New England. That deep dark blue is centered on the central part of Alabama and the northwest part of Alabama, northeast part of Alabama. That is the center of tree diversity in North America. Where is it? Right slap dab in the middle of Alabama. Now you begin to understand why Alabama informed what Ed became. It was that contact. I don't know that Ed would have begun to appreciate biodiversity quite the way he did if he had not grown up in Alabama. These are the Red Hills in the center of that tree diversity in Alabama, a really remarkable place. These are the rivers, the Cahaba River, with its incredible diversity. I mean, one stream in Alabama with probably more fish species than the entire state of California. And it's not just that single stream, it's many streams in Alabama that are that way. The mollusk diversity, throughout the river systems in Alabama is just remarkable, with fish not known anywhere else. And you know, we talk about rare species, but the Alabama sturgeon should be close to our hearts. It's this incredible fish species. We don't even know that there are 2 or 3 of them left, and we've made very little effort to recover them. This beautiful golden fish that's incredibly old was once incredibly important to Alabama. And the Black Belt of Alabama, I got to talk about it a little bit. It's the center of politics for Alabama. What happened in the Black Belt helps to explain what happened to Alabama. It's a beautiful area with prairies and all sorts of great wildflowers like the Alabama delphinium. Cane brakes. We forget that bamboo was an important part of Alabama throughout the state. It would be fun to talk about just the bamboo, but it also became the center of the Cotton Kingdom, a center of human enterprise, for better or for worse. It was people were selling Alabama by 1830 and 1840 as the great center for agricultural production. They needed a place where they could do agriculture on an industrial scale. And that place was increasingly apparent was the Black Belt of Alabama. But on the bluffs of the Alabama River in central Alabama, in 1812, the last of the tribes of North America, with names we don't even remember, the Coasati, the Alabama, the Uchi, the Naniaba. They were almost gone. They had almost been wiped out by slaving and other things, but there was a remnant, and there was a Creek remnant, a remnant of the Creeks that decided, you know, Tecumseh had come down. Tecumseh, some of you may remember Tippecanoe and Tyler too. Tyler destroyed Tecumseh's forces in the northern areas in Indiana and Ohio. But Tecumseh came down and brought the old time religion to Alabama, where his folks were, where his people were. And he came to Tuscaloosa and he said, you know, this is it, 1812, we've got to win. The comet in the sky has told us this is the time for our rising. If we are ever going to be a people again, if we were ever going to recognize what it is to be Creek and Choctaw and Naniaba and Alabama and Coasati, we have to do it now. And so a group of Creeks, they call themselves the Red Sticks, caught the old time religion from Tecumseh. And the prophet of the group, Josiah Francis, said, we're going to build a city, and we're going to build it on the banks of the Alabama River, in the heart of hickory diversity globally, the place where we developed some of our biggest cities. And we're going to reestablish a utopian community called Econochaca. And Econochaca was built in 1812 with 100 houses, like houses that had never been built before, with chimneys like they'd never even anybody had ever seen before or since. Immediately in this little beautiful cove surrounded by hickories, which was one of the great commercial items of the early American people. And it was a thriving community. And Andrew Jackson looked at that community and said, uh-oh, all of our plans for exploiting the Black Belt, this is bad. We've got to do something. And there were plenty of excuses. And by 1812, Andrew Jackson sent his forces, wiped out Econochaca. It was the end. It marked the beginning, actually, of the Great Red Stick Wars, which ended at Horseshoe Bend. And that was the end of American Indian sovereignty in Eastern North America. All the tribes were moved out west. Andrew Jackson developed the Indian policy, even described which tribes would be the official tribes. And all the other tribes were kind of negated. After that Battle of 1812, it set in American Indian policy for the next 200 years, all because of what happened in Alabama on the banks of the Alabama River, Econochaca, a hugely important place. We forget about that. 1965, there's a fellow named Stokely Carmichael. I don't know if you know Stokely, but you know Black Power. Stokely was popularizing the concept of Black Power. It wasn't a thought that, it wasn't even a thought people talked about. They wouldn't dare talk about it. And Stokely had become the director of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And he came to the South with his ideas of Black Power and said, we can't wait. We don't have to wait for permission to be people, to be men, to be women. We're going to do it ourselves. And so he came with SNCC, and he came to Lowndes County, in the middle of Alabama, in the middle of the Black Belt, on the same bend of the Alabama River where Econochaca was built. And he said, we're going to register voters here. Lowndes County was 80% Black, and had 2 Black registered voters since Reconstruction, 2. By the end of SNCC's work, by the end of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee's work in 1965, as Martin Luther King is preparing to march from Selma to Montgomery, there's no accident that that's happening, all in Alabama, all on the banks of the Alabama River. Stokely has succeeded, and SNCC has succeeded in registering more Black voters in Lowndes County than there are white voters. If you don't think that scared the hoolie out of the white power brokers in Lowndes County, you missed it. And it did. Every tenant farmer, and there were many Black tenant farmers who had registered to vote, were kicked out of their houses. They lived in tents for 2 years, 2 years, while this was ongoing. Stokely needed a name for the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, the party that they were fielding, that was fielding the candidates for this election. And they thought about, George Wallace had his famous symbol. People couldn't read in Alabama in those days. A lot of folks couldn't. So if you voted, you didn't vote for a person, you voted for a symbol. And if you voted for George Wallace and the Democratic Party, you voted for the rooster, the big cocky rooster that was so much a part of Alabama politics for a long time. What was going to be the symbol that represented the Lowndes County Freedom Organization and Black Power in Alabama? It was the Black Panther. Stokely Carmichael, H. Rap Brown began the Black Panther Party in Alabama. And it's an interesting story because I think it tells us something about our fear of this landscape. It was a creature that came right out of this landscape. We could talk about where our ideas about what Black Panthers are in Alabama, where they came from. I think they came from the Jaguars that even in human times used to roam Alabama pretty frequently. But it's that ancestral memory, that ancestral fear that Stokely tapped into. He began the Black Panther Party in Alabama. Didn't win that election. Every candidate that he fielded was 12 votes short exactly of winning the election. You'll have to figure out why that happened. Certainly we don't cheat on ballots in Alabama, but that's what happened. The next election afterwards, Stokely the Lowndes County Freedom Organization came back and won the election in virtually and changed more than any other county the representation in one election by 1969. Really an incredibly important event there. And we have some great opportunities to preserve that. One of the things we're working on in Central Alabama, I'll mention briefly, is the Black Belt Heritage Area, a National Park Service designation that will pull all this together. We have some really great ways of working to preserve and tell the story of Alabama, both its biodiversity and its human diversity, and to reconnect people with the landscape that made us what we are. And that's a really important story in Alabama. The Black Belt Heritage Area, look for it. It's got a lot of support. It's got legs, probably going to make it through Congress. Let's all support that. But let me take you to one more area in Alabama to talk a little bit about this diversity. I hate having to skip over Birmingham because there's some really cool things going on there. And we could talk a lot about it and all the other areas, but we have a limited amount of time. So let me take you to Northeast Alabama. And you can see that little blue area where we're headed. It's the center of deciduous tree and shrub diversity in North America. Incredible place with just incredible tree diversity. A beautiful valley, the Paint Rock Valley. This great 19th century valley, as it looks to me. I don't know how long it'll stay that way. Huntsville is knocking on the door every day. Chattanooga is coming from the other direction, but an incredibly beautiful, well-preserved valley. Some people call it the Little Shenandoah Valley of Alabama, but there's nothing little about it. It's huge. It stretches some 35 miles north and to the University of the South, really. The back door of Sewanee is really where this valley starts, and it stretches down to the Tennessee River, an immense area with this beautiful tree diversity. So when I was working for the Nature Conservancy a number of years ago, a guy named Steve Hubble came to me and said, look, I really want to set up a place where we can understand forests in North America, where we can understand them in the same way we now understand tropical forest. Steve had 45 years ago, he's at UCLA, he was head of the UCLA's evolutionary biology department, but 45 years ago, he set up a program in Barrow, Colorado in Panama, where he looked at trees over 125 acres, and he looked at every stem bigger than a pencil and followed it for 50 years. Everything, almost every paper that references tropical forests and its diversity and how climate change is affecting forests and how trees affect climate change. Almost every paper references this incredibly robust study that Steve set up in Barrow, Colorado, in Panama, almost 45 years ago. He said, I want to do this in North America, and I want to do it in a diverse place. So we've got a place up at Harvard Forest, I should acknowledge. But you know, Massachusetts, it isn't that diverse. Don't tell the folks at Harvard I said that. But it doesn't have the kind of diversity. So Steve said, how do we set this up in a place that's really hyper diverse? Let's do this in North Carolina. Let's do this in Joyce-Kilmer. And I said, Steve, they'll never let you do it in Joyce-Kilmer National Forest. One, they wouldn't let you set it up there. Two, if you did, it would be destroyed. And three, it's not even that diverse. There are 40 species of oaks in Alabama, Steve. There are 12 species of oaks in all of the Appalachians from North Carolina up to Pennsylvania. Let's find the places where we have real forest diversity. So we looked in Alabama, we looked in Georgia, we looked in Northwest Florida, the Apalachicola Bluffs, we looked in the Red Hills, one of the places I love in South Alabama and South Mississippi, incredible, that incredible center of total tree diversity in North America. But we kept coming back to this place in Paint Rock as a place to set it up. And so we began working on it. Paint Rock is the center of cave diversity in North America, the center of cave life. Incredible assortments of caves on this karst system, caves of all types, really fascinating just to see the cave diversity itself. But the forest it supports are even more incredible, just beautiful stuff with species that don't really exist much anywhere else, like this beautiful painted buckeye. Alabama is the center of buckeye diversity. It's the Buckeye State, by the way, not Ohio. And because we have so many beautiful species, many of which don't occur outside the state. Trillium diversity, we have half of all the trillium species in the world here in Alabama. Incredible. Orchid diversity, just stunning here. And trees trees like the smoke trees, which are just incredibly almost restricted to the Paint Rock River Valley, along with other plants that are so beautiful, and this incredible tree diversity. And you can just look through the forest sometimes and just look at the trunks, and you can see the diversity in the trunks. An incredible place. Let's start here. So Steve began working with a lot of scientists on how to develop this. And in one memorable exchange, that famous Harvard alum, Ed Wilson, came to explore the Paint Rock Forest, and he and Steve argued. And it was like two titans. You gotta understand it. They are the two top titans in evolutionary biology, and they argued, occasionally fought over what this center should be and how it should work. But we came to terms, and Ed came to terms, and he said, I'll support you. I'll do this. I'm going to be on your board. I just want you to know, I'm going to be on your science advisory board, whether you want me to be or not. But here's what you got to do. You've got to make this the Woods Hole of forest research in North America. You've got to understand everything from the top to the bottom in this forest. You've got to understand every species. You've got to make this an incredible center of study. And so we began working on it with this great program. And it's a really great program. I'll show you a little bit more about it. But we also recognized early on, as we were developing this program with Steve and with Ed, that diversity in Alabama isn't just about the plants. It isn't just about the snakes. It isn't just about the animals. It's about the people. And so we recognized that we wanted this to be a great training center for the next generation of scientists and natural historians in Alabama. So we set up a program with Alabama A&M so that it reflected the full diversity of Alabama's history. Alabama A&M is a historically Black land-grant institution. And early on, we developed that program, and we worked with USDA to get grants for Alabama A&M to become part of that, so we can train the next generation of scientists, even as we're understanding the future of forest in North America, because we believe this is the place we're going to do it. And we created a center, a campus called the Paint Rock Forest Research Center, which is a really extraordinarily beautiful place, a great place to visit. If you understand topography and you can read maps, this gives you a sense of some of the incredible diversity of the slopes on this site. This is one of the things that attracted us to it, because those slopes, with all of their different elevational gradients, it's like a microcosm of Eastern North America. If I can understand why things are here and why they aren't in other places, and if I can understand why they're in one place here and not another place here in Paint Rock, I can tell you a lot about what's going to survive in the forest and what we need to do to help forests survive as climate change moves and it impacts the rest of the globe. I'm also going to be able to help you understand what it is that we can do with forest and other ecosystems to help mitigate some of that change. Incredibly rich place. And so we began Steve's program with our students and with our trees and our forest to map every stem over 1 centimeter, over the size of a pencil, over 60 hectares, 150 acres. It will be the biggest forest dynamics plot in North America. I can tell you over and over again that we're mapping everything over 1 centimeter, and until you come and see it and you see that every stem literally has a tag on it and a mark and is being mapped, you can't appreciate the amount of effort that goes into this data collection. It's probably the most robust outdoor laboratory in North America right now, and it's happening here in Alabama. And so many things are coming together: the great diversity of the forest, the great human diversity, and there's the tagging effort is going on. We're we've just completed about a quarter of the plot, and we already have more diversity than any other forest dynamics plot in the temperate world. It's incredible what we're finding. The crews are having a great time, and we're bringing in great crews with all sorts of folks and from all over Alabama. Really an incredible thing. We're bringing in researchers from everywhere. University of Georgia has been a big participant in what we're doing. They're doing incredible work helping us to understand how trees interact with soil. University of Alabama is playing a big role, and University of Alabama Museums has played a big role, and particularly John and Kendra Abbott, who've done great work with collecting insect species in Paint Rock, and we're just beginning to explore that. There's so many great stories there. I'd love to tell you. Drew Lanham from Clemson, who's one of the world's great ornithologists. We're really excited to have him working with us. And he's got some great ideas for working in these plots. He's incredibly excited about this forest, but he's also a person who understands what it is to be Black and a scientist, and the obstacles that minorities still face in science. And so he's very interested in working with our program and bringing students along. It's really excited to have Drew here working with us so closely. And we even allow, we allow almost any type on our forest, even folks from the Harvard Alumni Club. And so we've had a great time bringing all sorts of folks onto the property, and we'll talk about bringing you all on when we have an opportunity. And it's fascinating what we're discovering. New species all the time. Here's one of the new species of azaleas we're working on. Incredibly beautiful thing. What kind of oak is that? Well, it's the oak that brought Alabama's oak species to the nice round number 40. It's a new species of oak. If it looks like anything you've seen before, you tell me. But how do we overlook things like that? It's because we forget how diverse Alabama is, and we forget how important Alabama's diversity is to the rest of the United States. I can't emphasize that enough, because our lessons in diversity will be incredibly important to the function of the whole country and to the survival of the whole country. Our lessons in human diversity are incredibly important, and we need to be sharing those with the rest of the country. Our lessons in biological diversity are just as important, because the reason Alabama is so diverse, the reason it has so many more species than so many other places, really the third most diverse state in the country right now, only California and Texas with 6 times and 3.5 times the land area are more diverse. Why is Alabama so diverse? Because it survived climate changes in the past. That's a big thing. And that genetic diversity, Alabama has harbored that genetic diversity here, and as climate warms catastrophically, which it's done before, and which is doing even faster now than it has in the past, Alabama's biological diversity is going to be incredibly important to the survival of forest across North America. You ask me why. It's really interesting. And we're doing the DNA work now to look at that and understand how our forests are going to determine how forests throughout Eastern North America survive. Incredibly important work we're doing here on this campus, a beautiful spot to do it. We designed it to be attractive. We've set it up to be attractive. These were houses that were already built. We didn't have to build them, thank goodness, with lumber prices being what they are. But just an incredible facility. Love to have you visit sometime with a very welcoming area. We wanted it to be because we wanted to attract researchers here. But everywhere you look, even at night, the diversity of Alabama shows. It was an interesting revelation that to me that we talk about all different kinds of fireflies, and people travel all over the world to see the synchronous fireflies in North Carolina. And one of the reasons that those synchronous fireflies stand out in North Carolina is because they're the only firefly there. Turns out at Paint Rock, one of our photographers, John Abbott, with the University of Alabama Museums, photographed fireflies while he was here a few weeks ago. This is a result of that. And he discovered that not only did we have synchronous fireflies, we had blue fireflies, we had other types of fireflies, all here at Paint Rock. Why didn't we notice? Because the diversity is so high, you can't discern the synchronous fireflies in the midst of all of the others. It's just this incredible diversity that's part of what we are. It's so much diversity that it even takes special eyes to see it sometimes. But an incredible place. Alabama's diversity, it matters to the rest of the country. What we're doing at the Paint Rock Forest Research Center right now, we're a nonprofit working with the Nature Conservancy on 4,500 acres of land that the Nature Conservancy owns here in Northeast Alabama, is going to matter to the rest of the country in some huge ways. What we're doing in the Black Belt, it's going to matter to the rest of the country in huge ways. What we're doing on the Alabama River and in the Alabama River Delta around Mobile is going to play a huge role in what happens in the rest of North America. It's a sacred place. Econochaka, the holy ground, as the Red Sticks called it. A very important place for us all. I hope you'll appreciate Alabama. Let us introduce you, as you have time, to all of the things we're doing in Alabama and to all of those beautiful places. I've talked enough, Will. Maybe we should open it up to questions.
Yeah, if anyone has questions, you can put them in the chat or just come off of mute. You know, we don't have it's not such a huge group that we couldn't just come off. I think Jennifer has a question about the Dothan area. What specifically is wiregrass? That's an interesting question.
Oh, good heavens.
You can't look it up on Google.
Yeah, no, you can't. Jennifer, what a great question. You know, the grass that gave the wiregrass its name is now really endangered. It's almost non-existent. Wiregrass was a particular kind of grass. I won't give you all the Latin names. Aristida. It's a 3-awn grass that covered huge areas of the wiregrass region under the longleaf ecosystem. It required fire. It was what we grazed cattle on. It was a great grazing grass. It was one of the things that made the diversity of the longleaf forest so great. But we ignored it. We ignored that longleaf pine ecosystem. We decided peanuts were enough, and we wiped out the wiregrass ecosystem. So the forest, the longleaf pine forest, and the grass that gave the wiregrass its name is now almost gone completely. We're trying to save little pieces of it. It's really hard. Help us any way you can.
Wow.
Tell the story of longleaf in the wiregrass. It's hugely important. It helps to understand, you can't understand culturally why the wiregrass is what it is without understanding that longleaf ecosystem. Wiregrass, hugely important. A beautiful grass, by the way. If you've ever seen a stand of it in flower, it's one of the most golden things you've ever seen. Just absolutely stunningly beautiful.
Go ahead and tell me the Latin name, please. I might be able to
Yeah.
actually see a picture.
So let's start here. Aristida, Aristida. That's the genus, Aristida. And there are two species. Oh boy. Let's go with the simple one to spell. Stricta, Stricta, like strict with an A on the end of it. Aristida stricta. The other one that's probably more common in Alabama is Aristida beyrichiana. Oh man, don't make me spell it. Beyrichiana. I should get an award. Aristida beyrichiana and Aristida stricta.
Awesome question, and that's really useful since I was confused
Yeah.
with the grass region too. Rowena asked a question. When you say we are working on all of these projects throughout the state, is this all under the Paint Rock research?
No.
Nature Conservancy?
Thank you for letting me clarify. No, there's several programs that Beth and I have been involved in throughout the state. One is the Alabama River Diversity Network. And we work quietly. It's sometimes good to work quietly in Alabama. I won't go into the gory details, but we work quietly throughout the Alabama River corridor. But our big focus right now is on the Black Belt National Heritage Area, which has a huge amount of support. Shelby's working on it. So yeah, I'm a part of that. And so are a lot of other people, the Nature Conservancy, the National Park Conservation Association, a lot of former National Park Service employees who are very high up in the Park Service. It's a huge constituency right now working on that. And there are a lot of things. You'll have to ask me back just to talk about that because it's so big. So that's really good. But here in Northeast Alabama, the Paint Rock Forest Research Center is focused on the Paint Rock Valley and the surrounding Tennessee Valley. And that's, I am the founding director of the Paint Rock Forest Research Center, which is a nonprofit in its own right. We started this when I worked with Nature Conservancy 12 years ago, 13 years ago. We now have a very close relationship and a working agreement with the Nature Conservancy on their 4,500 acres of land surrounding the land that we own. So it's really a neat partnership and with Alabama A&M and a lot of other universities, and it's growing. We designed the Paint Rock Forest Research Center as a multi-institutional facility, so that Harvard and Yale and University of Georgia and University of Alabama and now University of South Alabama and University of West Alabama and Alabama A&M and a lot of other groups can be involved in what we do.
That's awesome, Bill. I did want to mention briefly, a lot of this, the scholarship and the connections between, Ed Wilson and Harvard, Yale, Georgia, all of these fantastic places is really an amazing opportunity also for Alabama. And I think what you talked about is a fantastic sort of magnet for interesting and unique scholars to come here. I'd also mention that in the past, we've as the clubs, and I make this as a plug, have hosted a lecture series. We had the Harvard Club as an E.O. Wilson Distinguished Lecture Series. And so to the extent, maybe this is something that we can explore, but perhaps we can bring in speakers on the topics of the biodiversity and some of the research, and then use that as a way to convene, interested alumni and others who want to learn more about this in a bit of an event. That's not really a question, but more of a sort of statement. But curious your thoughts on how we can continue to champion this to a wider audience.
Yes, so here's the thing. Alabama has always looked outside of Alabama to find its economy, to find its value and its worth. We've never looked inside. We've never looked at our state. We've never looked at our history. It's something we're always forced to do. If we ever do it. And so for the first time, I think we have a chance to see that Alabama's future, its economy, the economy of Alabama, could be based on the diversity of Alabama for the first time since European conquest. And it's a really important thing. All of the great things about Alabama we so often overlook. The Mississippian culture that was so dominant here in 1250 AD was not. It was a resource-intensive culture, and it probably wasn't a great model, but at least they understood where they were, and because of that, they became one of the great centers of commerce in North America. One of my favorite thoughts is that the first great commercial product of Alabama was hickory milk. You don't even know what hickory milk is.
Nope.
It's incredible that we are the global diversity center of hickory diversity. We have 90% of the hickory species, 80% of the hickory species globally here in Alabama. And it's not incidental that we also were once the great center of hickory milk, which is a great commodity. William Bartram talked about how beautiful it is. I learned how to make it. I'm not sure we'll make a great economy just on hickory milk, but it's an example of thinking about where you are and what makes a difference. And so I think as we communicate Alabama's biodiversity, we trade on it in beautiful ways and in ways that are sustainable. And we've never done that. We've never done that in the past 400 years. And so I think that's really the beginnings of what we do. And I think the Paint Rock Forest Research Center is a way of doing that. We are, I don't want to be a fire hose, so I'm not talking about everything, but it would be fun to talk about agriculture and how we're thinking about agriculture and how it's compatible with Ed's concept of half Earth. Half Earth is about preserving half of the Earth for biodiversity, but there's another half, isn't it, where we live? And how do we think about those? And how do we think about melding those two? And how do we rethink agriculture so that it really appreciates where we are? Agriculture in Alabama has been based on agriculture in Illinois. Oh man, don't get me started. It's crazy. It's insane. We can't produce nearly what Illinois can produce, but we try to produce the same crops. And so it's no wonder we're way behind. We need to think about what Alabama is and what it does and rethink it left and right. And that's what I hope the Research Center is here to do, is to help us think about where we are and how to take advantage of it in ways that don't just exploit it, but that are sustainable over the long haul.
That's great. Other questions, folks? I did want to mention, so this is great, Bill and Beth. Yeah, we've been up to the Research Center. I think a group of us have. I did want to ask a question that was asked sort of early on around, is this open to the public, or how can folks get involved if they want to do it?
So we designed this as a research center. We did not design it as a public access spot for a lot of good reasons. For the same reasons I told Steve Hubble not to put his research plot in the middle of Joyce Kilmer National Forest. It would be trampled. It would be destroyed. You have to control access when you have a huge outdoor laboratory like that. However, we are doing tours, and they're guided tours, and we're doing them with some regularity. And now that the COVID thing has been somewhat suppressed, we're doing it a lot more. So let's talk, and let's talk about visits from your folks. We'd love to show you around a larger group of alumni.
Great.
Ed would want that, by the way.
And I guess just building on that, Bill, and how can we support or help, or how can folks who are interested in sort of what you're doing?
We're a project that had an idea first, a lot of projects start with a property. They start with some funds, with a wealthy donor. We didn't start there. We started with an idea. And so we've had to scrap for every dime we've gotten for this project. We've put together, believe it or not, about more than $1 million right now towards the research program. Much of that went to supporting the research being done by Alabama A&M, and quite a lot of it got absorbed by something that these colleges do. I'm sure Harvard doesn't do it, called overhead. Dadgummit. But we still have quite a bit of funds coming in for the research. We decided that it was necessary to create a campus that was comfortable. And so we took a chance and we bought these buildings. Heavens to Betsy. It's a big chance. We have to pay for these buildings, by the way. It's a really important thing. We're well on our way. I think we're a little more than 50% there towards actually securing the campus. Another building came available. We could not put the burden of that on the nonprofit, so we're putting together a consortium of buyers to hold that until the research center can purchase it. But yeah, we've got to pay for this research. We need scholarship dollars. We're already recognizing the need for scholarships that encourage certain types of research. We need dollars to defray the cost of purchasing these houses, and so there's a good bit of money involved that we have to work towards. Again, we didn't begin with a big donor. We brought together people who loved what we were doing, people who were interested, people who were willing to support it, and it takes a lot of work to do that. But we're making real progress. We've just got some more work to do.
Awesome. Well, Bill, any other questions from the group? You know, I can say to everyone, thank you, first of all, Bill, and I know Beth, your partner in crime here, and also the source of many of these beautiful photos. They're both great hosts. And so, you know, if we want to organize another trip up, I think that might be something in our near future. We've been recording this, so we will share this around not only within the Harvard alumni group and also those folks registered here, but also post that widely. So if folks want to, you know, share this and expose it. I know personally, this is one of these things. Not only is it just an interesting project, but you know, having really experienced this heat wave this summer. You know, it's starting to feel like the change, global climate change, and other, you know, of these issues that we've talked about for decades are starting to really come home to roost. And so this is really important. And then, you know, and Mike is also asking about, you know, speaking about invasive plant species in Alabama and what is the role for us as citizens. So I think I'll give that back to Bill, and maybe you can answer that a little bit, but I will just wrap up by saying, you know, after this question, we will share this around and hope that we can continue this conversation as a group. We're also going to share, you know, to this point about supporting the buildings, a little GoFundMe campaign, so that if folks do want to contribute to this great project, we will promote that and get that around. But you know, Bill, before we hang up, it would be interesting if you could talk about invasive plant species and sort of some of the other roles that we can get involved in or help if we're interested in you know, supporting the biodiversity of Alabama.
Yeah, a couple of things coming out of the chat too. Jennifer said, glad we'll be growing cannabis soon, but you know, cannabis doesn't grow that well in Alabama, by the way. It's another one of those ideas we import from other places without really thinking about whether it works here. Now, whether cannabis works for you personally is another thing altogether, but whether it works agriculturally in Alabama, it's another one of those cotton things. It doesn't really work that well. It doesn't really work that well in Alabama, and we'll soon find that out. We need to really explore Alabama agriculture from the bottom up, and we'll talk about that some other day. Invasive species, big issue. One of the nice things about where we're working now here in Paint Rock is the relative lack of impactful invasive species Japanese honeysuckle is huge everywhere in Alabama. We've kind of gotten used to it, and the forest has accommodated to some degree, and we still have a little bit of Japanese honeysuckle here, but some of the other species aren't as much of a problem. You know, it's a very interesting thing. Kudzu is not a huge problem in Alabama. We wasted a lot of time talking about it. The reason we thought it was a huge invasive species is because we spent all of our time driving in cars, and the only part of the landscape we saw was the landscape along the sides of the road. I did an article for Smithsonian about that. You can look it up. It's kind of interesting. It'll change your perspective on what an invasive species is and what it does. But we do have a lot of big problem species. Bermuda grass is a huge, amazingly enough, is a huge invasive species. Fescue grass, which people are still planting in their lawn, huge invasive species. Kogon grass and privet, huge invasive species issues throughout Alabama. You know, on the way to the talk today, I was actually thinking about what are some of the creative ways we can use to deal with some of these invasive species. And I think we really haven't begun to think about that yet, but it's going to take a lot of work. Kogon grass, you have no idea. It's incredible. And until you've tried to restore the great grasslands of Alabama, you have no idea what a problem fescue and Bermuda grass are. They're two European grasses that were introduced, and they're terrible. They're horrible. I hate them. I shouldn't take it out on plants because it's not their fault. We brought them here, but man, what a pain. So they're going to be a lot of work. Fortunately, in Paint Rock, we don't have that problem yet. And we're working as quickly as we can. One invasive species we do have a problem with is emerald ash borer, which is about to attack all the ashes in Alabama. The Paint Rock is one of the great centers of ash diversity. How many? I think we said something like we have about 60% of the ash species in North America here in Alabama. It's going to have a huge impact on Alabama, the emerald ash borer, when it gets here. So we do need to quit carelessly importing these kinds of creatures into Alabama. That's the first step. And the second step is thinking creatively about how to deal with them. That's another talk, Mike.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Bill. And yeah, we'll send this everything around after the fact. Would very much love to promote this. And again, getting back to just having a different conversation. I love this idea of exporting great things about Alabama and making it the basis of our economy, and also thinking about what makes us unique and distinctive. Great thoughts to share. So with that, thanks everyone for joining. We'll let you get back to your day, but I know you'll get some materials after this from us just for registering, and feel free to share those around. So Bill, Beth, thank you so much. And
thank you all for all the effort you've put into this. Tara and Will and Alicia, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Well, hopefully you all enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.
Thanks.